tonight, I just wanted to let everybody know that Dr. Mahmood, who was going to be our guest speaker tonight, unfortunately had a family emergency. So he's unable to attend, but we still have a very good, informative presentation on clinical trials that we're excited to provide you. And we're still here with Lynn, who is our patient parent provider who can provide that lived experience. So we're excited to have everybody here tonight. And I just want to introduce myself. I'm Ruth Kapelis. I'm the National Content and Media Relations Manager at Breakthrough T1D. And on behalf of everybody at Breakthrough, thank you for coming tonight. And we're excited to present you with more information on clinical trials and type 1 diabetes. If you are unfamiliar and this is your first time coming tonight, Breakthrough T1D is a global leader working towards a world free from T1D through research, funding, and advocacy. We support families in the T1D community from the time of diagnosis by helping those living with T1D to have better, healthier, and safer lives while working to find cures. We support anyone with T1D at any age or any stage, including the often underrepresented adult community. And I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the Breakthrough T1D Canada National Support Office is located on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples. The education series provides information on a new topic approximately every other month. We will be having another one next month on mental health and type 1 diabetes. We also host a virtual connection series on the fourth Wednesday of each month, and this is an unstructured opportunity to connect with others with no formal programming. We just had one yesterday, so the next connection series will be taking place on Wednesday, May 21st at 12 p.m. Pacific time and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just a couple of admin things. There's a chat where you can put your questions. You can also raise your hand if, as we go, you have any questions as they come. Otherwise, we'll save the Q&A for the end, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can before the hour is up. Clinical trials are an essential stage of the research process and are the only way to investigate safety, tolerability, and efficacy of new potential therapies and treatments. Any treatment that is being developed for eventual use in a clinic must first be tested in a clinical trial. This can include drugs, devices, virtual care platforms, behavioral therapy, education, and more. But without them, medications or therapies that could improve quality of life may never reach the people who could benefit from them the most. So again, I'm sorry that we won't be joined tonight by Fareed, but I'm very excited to have my colleague Laura Green and Lynn MacArthur here tonight to provide insight into the clinical trial process from a parent-partner perspective, as well as from a researcher perspective. And Lynn will share about her experiences and answer any questions you might have about them at the end of the presentation. So with that, Laura, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Green, and I am the National Manager of Research with Breakthrough T1D Canada. I'm very happy to present to you today. I see some familiar faces, and my typical disclaimer stands that I do have 2 small children getting ready for bed, and it is always possible that a toddler may burst into the room mid-presentation. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so clinical trials. Skip ahead here. All right, what is a clinical trial? So as Ruth mentioned, it is any research that is looking at a new test or treatment and evaluating their effects on human health. This is probably something that we're very familiar with in terms of research moving ahead. Every single iteration of a device that you now know and love, has gone through clinical trials. It is very necessary to ensure that every iteration is safe and that it's as effective as it can be. It's also always going to be compared to other treatments that exist. We're going to have a quick video with like an animated demonstration, and let's hope the sound plays okay.
Clinical trials. You may have heard of them, but what are they? And how do they impact your health and the health of those around you? JDRF is here to explain. Clinical trials are studies where real people help scientists and doctors figure out if new treatments are safe and effective. Every medical breakthrough in history went through a clinical trial. Today, many people with type 1 diabetes wear what is called a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, which provides real-time blood sugar readings. This helps them better control their blood sugar and potentially avoid long-term complications such as vision loss or kidney disease. But CGMs weren't really utilized until about 20 years ago. So how did they go from an idea in a research lab to being used by millions of people around the world? Clinical trials. Here's how clinical trials work. First, researchers test the device or medication in a laboratory or preclinical setting. This is the preclinical phase. Based on these lab results, Health Canada approves research to be conducted with people. After preclinical, testing moves to phase 1. Phase 1 is all about safety. A small group of clinical trial volunteers are carefully selected to examine how the treatment affects the body, whether it should be provided with a pill, injection, or other means, and what the dosage should be. Phase 2 tests the treatment with a larger group of clinical trial volunteers with the disease or condition for which it's being developed. On average, 100 to 300 people will help determine side effects and effectiveness. Phase 3 compares the new treatment to treatments that are already available. Several thousand volunteers are typically needed for this phase. If the new treatment is found to be effective, it is made available to the public. Now that you know what clinical trials are, you may be wondering, are they safe? Health Canada regulations require that clinical trial volunteers be provided with a thorough explanation of the study, including potential risks. Throughout the study, participants are in regular contact with doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers who rigorously monitor their health. And clinical trials are completely voluntary. You or your child can change your mind at any time for any reason. JDRF regularly funds clinical trials in many areas of research that aim to improve and create new therapies for people living with type 1 diabetes and its complications. Our ultimate goal is to discover potential cures for type 1 diabetes, but unfortunately, many clinical trials are delayed or fail because doctors can't find enough participants. That's why JDRF encourages everyone to consider participating in clinical trials to help further our mission to accelerate life-changing breakthroughs to treat, prevent, and cure type 1 diabetes and its complications. As a clinical trial volunteer, you're playing a crucial part in future medical discoveries and helping future patients. Learn more about clinical trials and find opportunities to get involved at jdrf.ca/research/clinical trials.
Okay. The question is, can I get off this slide? You may have to hold on while I unshare and reshare.
That's fine. I'm going to drop that. We are no longer JDRF, so I'm going to put the actual links in the chat now for you while we pull up the slides.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, our speaker didn't get the Breakthrough T1D memo. Okay. So what we often think of when we think about clinical trials is drugs, therapies, or large interventions like surgical interventions. Sometimes when we think of clinical trials, we think, oh, you must be at an end stage point to need an intense therapy. When in fact, clinical trials can include things like devices, even virtual care platforms need to be trialed, behavioral therapy, so that can be things like new exercise programs, or the 15 minutes, 15 carb ratio or rule that is currently used. That's something that is going through clinical trials to see if that's the most effective suggestion. Different education platforms, all of those go through clinical trials to ensure that what's being provided to patients and people is the best it possibly can be. Is that my computer just doesn't want to change slides whatsoever? Okay, so looking at some different types of research. What we heard about there is that it often starts with fundamental research, and that's understanding the mechanisms of different drugs and therapies. That is typically happening at the cellular level and potentially moves to an animal model. When we talk about clinical trials, then we're looking at epidemiology research and clinical research. So epidemiology is just generally means observing a population. This might look like data that is gathered at clinics and can be applied for to bring together to get a large data set to analyze. And it looks like registries. So for example, the Better Registry is our type 1 diabetes registry in Canada. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later. And then clinical research, as I mentioned. So that's new diagnostic tests, new therapies, medicines, and even education programs. So this is some information that we can get from a registry, for example. So for those who don't know, the Better Registry is for anybody living with type 1 diabetes or LADA in Canada. And it's also a great example of how patient engagement in research shapes up a project. So the Better Registry knew that we needed more data and information in Canada. What's really interesting is that our health data in Canada is extremely separated. Every province collects things differently. A lot of them are using different platforms and different coding. And that because of that, we don't even know exactly how many people in Canada live with type 1 diabetes, let alone knowing exactly how many people are on an insulin pump, are on a CGM, have hypoglycemic events, etc. This is what a registry is really important for. It also allows, having patient partners involved also allows you to tailor the research questions. And this is something that patient partners brought up, the mental health aspect of diabetes. And it might not be something that an endocrinologist would immediately think to include. They're thinking, what's your globular filtration rate? And what's your A1C? And the patient is saying, I need help with my mental health. And this is where we get that kind of data for, and that helps set research priorities. A question we get very often is, why does research take so long? And there's many reasons. I'm going to highlight a few of them here. So we heard in that video that there are certainly delays due to recruitment. Dr. Mahmood was going to present today on his kidney study in youth, which Lynn can also speak to. And some of the information he was going to present was that over 1,000 participants or 1,000 people were spoken to and asked to recruit in order to get a total of, I think the end number was 98 participants. So going from 1,000 people that were approached just to get 98 participants, and that went from opening up the site of Sick Kids in Toronto, one of the largest youth pediatric diabetes clinics, had to open it to other sites, including one in the US. So that added many years to that project that were purely due to troubles with recruitment. Another thing that people think is that if there's a trial that they are eligible for, their doctor will let them know about it. In fact, that's almost never the case. Our doctors are so strapped for time as it is that they don't have the ability to keep up to date with clinical trials. And so when we speak with healthcare providers, they say they would love to know about them. They just can't. Research is now moving at a pretty fast speed that they can't keep up to date. So we have created a clinical trial finder tool, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, so that you can sort of be an advocate for your own health if you're interested in participating in research. The other reason that it takes quite a while is long-term follow-up. And that makes complete sense. So if you're going to want to see a therapy looked at in a group of people to ensure it's safe, you're going to want to know it's safe in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years. And that means you have to wait a minimum of 5 years to see the results of that research. So that often takes a lot of time. We're seeing that now with the drug Tzield or teplizumab that actually entered its first clinical trials back in 2005. It was approved by the FDA in 2022. So already there's almost 2 decades of research. It is under Health Canada review right now for anybody who's curious there. But one of the important things there was knowing how people are reacting 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out. And so those trial participants actually are still being followed. And a lot of them have been now multiple years since they've had that drug. And lastly, we're going to talk about the phases of clinical trials. So again, it was shown a little bit in that video that clinical trials move through 3 different phases. You want to make sure it's safe. You want to make sure it's effective, which means comparing it to not having any treatment. And then you want to compare it to existing treatments that are out there. So this is typically how we think about the phases of clinical trials. So going from preclinical work to an initial clinical trial is a huge hurdle. A lot of researchers refer to it as the valley of death. It is a lot of work to get into that, what we typically call first in human trials. That is a big hurdle in a regulatory sense. You've got to show all of your preclinical work is enough to prove that it should be safe in the first human that you're going to use. And I'll talk about this specifically in terms of some of the newer islet cell replacement therapies. And then those estimates of how many participants, that's certainly going to change depending on what it is. So that might be true with devices, but of course, something like an islet cell replacement we'll see is going to be much smaller. It then moves through those 3 phases. You do need a Health Canada approval even just to begin clinical trials. And then at the end of a pivotal trial, you'd be seeking Health Canada approval to market the therapy, whatever it may be. So I'm going to give an example using the recent Vertex trials. Vertex, you might know it as VX-880. It's also called the Forward trial, and now recently renamed the Zymilacel trial. So that is the stem cell derived islets that are being used to cure type 1 diabetes. They're being transplanted into the portal vein, and those come with those are from a lab grown, right? They're stem cell derived, and they do require immunosuppression. So in phase 1, and this started in 2019, it started with one single patient who got a half dose of the cells. And that person was then monitored for, I think, about 6 months to a year. Once that person had been monitored with only a half dose of the cells, very, very closely, they presented all that data to Health Canada, and they were allowed to move into phase 1, part B. That was 6 patients who got a full dose, but they had to stagger each patient. So one patient could get a full dose, they had to wait 6 months. The second patient could start, wait 6 months. The third patient could start. So you can see here that the years are starting to add up. Once they presented that data and demonstrated safety, they opened it up to the next, so then there would have been 4 more patients for a total of 10 patients. They were, rather than stopping the study at that point, presenting all of the data and calling it an end, they got approval to move into a phase 1/2 trial, which means that they could just keep rolling and expand the criteria. So you can see we're not in the hundreds. We're talking about 37 patients. And then just this past November, they got approval to move into a pivotal trial. So they are now recruiting to get a total of 50 patients. This is happening internationally. It is in 5 different locations in Canada, and Canada has been really recruiting quite well. And we do have results of the first 12 patients. So from that phase 1, there ended up being 12 patients dosed sort of in a similar time point. And 11 of those 12 are completely off insulin. The other one is just on a couple of units a day of basal insulin. And they're doing regular readouts as participants hit their 1-year marks. So that's at the 1-year time point for those 12 participants. But you can see here why research takes quite a while. And then, so those numbers are being added together. They they're looking for 50 total, including phase 1 and phase 2. They will end up with 50 total participants. I just saw that question pop up. So when the 50 total participants have been dosed and they have followed them for a minimum of 1 to 2 years, they can then look at applying to the FDA or Health Canada for market approval. I also saw the question pop up of a regular readout. Basically, that just means they're letting the public know study data as it comes along. Especially with an industry trial, it's really up to them if they want to publicly announce what's happening with the study or if they want to hold that back. And this is a unique trial because there's no placebo, right? You can't really have a placebo of an islet replacement. So in many trials, you might have a placebo group where one trial is receiving a therapy and the other group got a placebo, and everything is blinded. And so then you have to wait until the end of the time period to unblind all the results and be able to look at them. That's not the case because you can't pretend to do an islet transplant. So that's just an example of a reason that research takes a long time and why it is important for it to take a long time to demonstrate that safety. So if you're interested in how you can get involved in research, there's a few different ways. So I did mention that we have a clinical trials binder tool. We developed this so that patients feel, participants with lived experience or participants with diabetes feel like they are able to make some of their own health decisions, because of course this is a self-managed condition. Sometimes you know your condition more than your own doctor knows your condition. And so this binder tool lists every single actively recruiting clinical trial in Canada that is looking for people with type 1 diabetes. It might be very specific. It might be people that have type 1 diabetes and kidney disease. It could be looking at only people within certain age ranges, but it lists all of that here. And there are features to sort. So you can look at travel distance of your area, your postal code, but we do also indicate if trials are happening virtually or in person. And there are a number of trials that just require virtual participation. You can check off the age. So right away, if you're a parent of somebody living with type 1 and they're a child, you might say, okay, forget all the adult studies. I only want to see what's available for children. If you'd like to know what we are funding, you can click on that Breakthrough T1D funded trial to see the research that we are actively funding that's in clinical trial stage. And then you could search by any keyword. So, you could search stem cell if you wanted to see what the active trials are going with for stem cell islet replacement. You can also register for alerts. So we realize that a lot of people want this information passively. You might think once like, oh, I'll go look it up and see what's happening. But will you remember to look again in 2 months and in 6 months, see if any new research has come up? So if you register for alerts, you can set your alert criteria specifically, again, only children or only looking for kidney disease, and you'll get those alerts straight to your email. You only need an email address to sign up. You can access the tool without registering. That's completely available. We do give layperson summaries as best as we can where available. We encourage healthcare providers to use it because, as we mentioned before, healthcare providers don't have the time on hand to be searching for clinical trials. So this is also available to them. And if you need any support, you can always reach out to us and we can help you set that up if you're interested. And I believe that Ruth is putting some information there in the chat. So lastly, I wanted to talk about what we call patient engagement or patient-oriented research. In the field of diabetes, we typically refer to it as people with lived experience, especially because oftentimes, like Lynn, it's the parent of the quote-unquote patient. But it is become a really, really critical part of research. All of our funded research, we ask for people with lived experience involvement. And not only that, we have people with lived experience reviewing grants for us. So we actually have a fellowship program open right now, And just as I was logging on to this, I saw that one of our patient partners, also a mom of adults living with type 1, completed her reviews of that research, basically saying, yes, I agree, this is important to the type 1 community, or maybe not so much, this isn't what the community is looking for. So patient engagement is really looking for meaningful collaboration. It can mean priority setting, so especially things like we need more mental health research, or fear of hypoglycemia is more important than, the level that you set hypoglycemia at, for example. So that can be developing the research question, using patient-centered measures, and that's a big one. I know one of the studies that I recently reviewed was asking people how diabetes affects their life, and it had a list of questions and things like, I struggle to carry groceries. I struggle to walk 100 meters. And it's like, well, these aren't really super clear, but ask me how many times I panicked when my CGM battery died today, So looking for patient-oriented measures that really capture the disease or condition. Realistic study design. As researchers, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as well, having been a researcher, sometimes we think, you know what, we'll get them to come in every day at 9 a.m. on the dot, and we'll make sure they haven't had any coffee, and we'll take the measures then. And you have somebody come in and say, if you're going to recruit any people to be in your study, that's not going to work for us. So making sure that the study design actually fits people's lives. And then this one is very critical too. How do you share the research findings after? It's not meaningful to the type 1 community if you say, oh, I published this work in a scientific journal and it's behind a paywall and the science community gets to see it. How do we share that information? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Lynn, who has experience being both a patient partner, if you will. Sometimes we say people with lived and loved experience, and also has experience being a pseudo participant in clinical trials via her children. So Lynn, thank you for being here.
Excellent. Thank you, Lara. I appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn MacArthur. I'm based out of Toronto, and I have 3 boys, 2 of which have type 1 diabetes. My youngest, one of my twins, was diagnosed with diabetes at 18 months while I was pregnant with my 3rd child. And so it rocked my husband's and I's world. We don't have diabetes in the family. This was not something that we had any exposure to in the past. In fact, the only exposure we had was from like a CSI TV show 2 weeks before our son was diagnosed, when the bad guy had type 1 diabetes and they could tell who he was because he had acetone on his breath. In fact, that's what helped us figure out that Aiden had type 1. So right from the beginning, we were associated with sick kids, which was probably the best experience I could hope for. No parent wants to have a close association with a children's hospital, but if you're going to have one, sick kids is a great one to have to go and visit quite frequently. And under the care of our endocrinologists at Sick Kids, we were exposed to the different trials that were currently in place. And we made the decision right out of the gate that we would try and contribute as quickly as possible to figure out, how do you make sure no other families have to go through type 1 diabetes? How do we figure out what triggers it? How do we figure out how to manage it better? And what can we do as a family to contribute to that success? And so we started right out of the gate. So my son, who was not yet born, and got enrolled in the Trigger study. My other son, who was not diagnosed, was part of TrialNet. My second son was involved as well in ADIT after he was diagnosed with diabetes at age 8. And then
Lynn,
Yeah.
I'm gonna nudge
Yeah.
you to expand on the acronyms.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm not even sure that I could remember what all the acronyms actually stand for. I'm sorry. TrialNet
Here,
was sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, trigger is even if we just describe that
Yep. Sorry. So
trigger, yeah.
trigger was a study where they were trying to figure out what actually triggered diabetes, what happened with your antibodies, and they would test your kids once a year and see if their antibodies changed, if they could see what's changed and what triggered. And with TrialNet, that was a screening for all family and extended family to see if, again, the same type of thing to see. Oh, geez. And now you're putting me on the spot, and I'm trying to remember because that was so long ago. But again, it was just to see whether if somebody became type 1 diabetic, they could go back and see what changed in their antibodies as well.
Lynn,
Um,
I think we have someone,
yep,
Allison, who I think wants to add something to
yep,
your trial net.
perfect.
Allison, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. I'm Allison. I've been type 1 diabetic for 30 years, and I have a 4-year-old daughter. And I love my endocrinologist. I got her when I was lucky enough to hit the jackpot with her when I was pregnant, because she specialized in women with type 1 diabetes and um, having children. And I asked her, like, what are the chances of my daughter? Like, that's on anyone's mind that has type 1 diabetes. And she said, she recommended TrialNet to me. And it was the first time I ever heard of it. And we got it done fairly quickly and painlessly through Sick Kids. We've actually already had our first appointment. But yeah, to support what Lynn was saying, essentially, it's to check the level of risk. And the first appointment, it can either be done really at your home by a simple blood test, or you can go to a lab clinic like Life Labs. They send you something in the mail. They make it very, very easy for you. And essentially they send it off and they look at, I believe it's 4 or 5 specific antibodies that are associated with elevated risk of diabetes. Um, and it turned out that our daughter actually has 2 of the antibodies, which puts her in a close to 100%, I think,
Right.
chance of getting diabetes. No one, science just can't say 100%. So I'm still hanging off that 1%. But they can tell if you have 1 antibody, no antibodies. They'll recommend that you follow up for follow-up tests, whether it's a year because you have 1 antibody, or every 2 years if you have no antibodies, because that, of course, itself isn't a guarantee either. But I will say the benefit of TrialNet is getting ahead of the disease before the progression of symptoms. I, for one, diagnosed myself because I read the Babysitter's Club books. I'm kind of like obviously
Uh,
aging myself here, but Stacy in that book had diabetes, and she was really, really thirsty and having to go to the bathroom all the time. And you want to avoid ketoacidosis and all those things. And being closely monitored through TrialNet allows you to get ahead and get a diagnosis before the symptoms. And it's as scary as it sounds, so I'm not trying to take over, but you can carry antibodies for years. You can carry them for a decade. It allows you to take as much control over a situation that you have no control over. And Sick Kids is wonderful. When I walked through those doors with my daughter for her follow-up, I had no ill feelings about it because I was there as a 12-year-old. So it's a great way to give back to science, because that's the only way we're going to find a cure.
Yeah, 100%, Allison. I think for me, one of the things that I've learned through all of this is it's much as art as it is science, and there's still so much for us to learn. One of the things when Lara was walking through what patient partners do, a really big piece of it is helping with the recruitment. you mentioned that, for the attempt trial, the one that Dr. Mahmood ran, it took over 1,000 kind of reach outs before we were able to have even under 100 people participate in the trial. And as a patient partner, what my role was to help take this very complicated trial and help make sure it was in plain language so that when parents and kids were having a look at, okay, what's this trial all about, they could understand the benefits and the risks and understand how it was going to impact their daily lives. So that was a big part of what I would bring to the table to the team. And the same thing with respect to looking at the research question and again, framing it in a way that was digestible and meaningful for the participants that were going to be within the trial. And then the last, I guess, two things, again, you mentioned them, Lara, were the realistic study design. As a parent of three children who've gone through multiple trials, I understand the challenges of trying to get children to adhere to the rules and regulations of making sure that we get efficacy in the trial. So with my two boys, when they were doing the ADIT, and again, you're going to ask me for the acronym, but I'll see if Ruth can put the actual full name in the chat. Both boys had to take pills every single night. And so, and they were in this study probably from age, I want to say 10 to 14. And you know how hard it is to get anybody to do anything at that age, let alone be rigorous at making sure that they were taking their pills every night. And so, and the same thing, every quarter they had to do urine tests. And so we had to remember to make sure that they got the urine tests day 1, day 2, day 3. And so how do you make sure that when they wake up in the morning that that's the first thing they remember? So when we were looking at structuring the study design and looking at what the implications were going to be for the children and the parents, I would be able to give them, this is what it felt like from a parent trying to get a child to actually do that in the disciplined way. And so it enabled them to kind of, one, look and see if there's ways that could make it easier for both the child and the parent to make sure that we were on track. And two, make sure that we were able to communicate how this was going to happen in a way that makes it super easy for the parents to follow through. And then the last piece, as Lara was saying before, the researchers are so excited about their findings, but they talk about it in medical speak, which, is not easy for us as parents to understand. What are the implications of what we went through? So that was another piece of what my role was to look at how they were presenting the findings and again, make sure that it was accessible language so that anybody, any parent or teenager or child who's participating would be able to understand what the outcomes were. So it was fairly broad ranging and super rewarding. I will say I've always wanted to give back to Sick Kids because it's such a phenomenal organization. And I've had the pleasure of working with so many wonderful endocrinologists at Sick Kids as well as the research team. So with that, I'll stop unless, Lara, there's anything else specific you wanted me to touch on.
I think that's fantastic. I think maybe we open it up for questions and see what comes. I know there are some questions happening in the chat, but feel free to put your hand up also if you'd like to ask us a question.
And you can unmute yourself as well and ask the question now. Please go ahead. Just have to unmute your mic. Am I able to unmute your mic?
I think, is that Niharika? Are you able to unmute and say your question?
Yes,
Oh,
sorry, I wasn't sure. Hi, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were talking to me. There's only so many participants I could see on the screen.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And this is great. I was just trying to ask a few questions and I appreciate that how researchers are finding it hard to get more participants, but from the other side of the bridge, I feel that there are very less research trials that we could participate in. So I'm a mom of a T1D who was diagnosed right at his second birthday. So I have been since his early diagnosis, I have been researching as to why this has happened, and I was very shocked to see that somebody coming from a completely non-medical background, I found out myself that there could have been some steps that the medical team could have taken, or had I known ahead of time that you guys are talking about some of those immune things that that you can see in the benchmarks that okay, this person is at the cusp of getting type 1 diabetes at some point in life, right? So that was totally not done in his case, where there were clear indications. Now 2 years after, I know that there were clear indications that they should have tested him. But that being said, I personally feel there are a few things. We're talking about SAB Bio, where they're doing all these researches, and it's happening in Australia, it's happening in UK, Europe, and US, but clearly Canada wasn't there. I listened to the podcast where the two pioneers who are leading that clinical trial clearly mentioned those geographic areas, and they said, and I heard that Canada wasn't there, so that was a complete shocker. And I'm just trying to understand why we're not able to um, combine treatments here, because from what I understand, somebody coming from non-medical background, is there is something happening to the immune, which a company is saying that they're going to modulate the immune to see if the immune is going to be a good boy. And then we are introducing beta cells into the system, and we're trying, as VX880 is trying to have a day where the patients do not have to take immunosuppressant. So while I listen to that podcast and I understand that the thymoglobulin, I think that's the word, they're not 100% sure right now that if one treatment is okay or if a second treatment will be needed. But certainly there's some modulation happening to your immune, wherein when beta cells are introduced, they may not be killed by your immune. And my third question, sorry, is that there should be more opportunity for younger kids as well. My kid was a newly diagnosed. He also had his third month of diagnosis. There was no clinical trial. He's still at a year of diagnosis, no clinical trials, but then they say, oh, your C-peptide level has to be at a certain level. I think there are a lot of ifs and buts that we are navigating through, which is creating more hurdles in eradicating type 1 diabetes, right?
Yeah, so
So,
I can speak to some of that for sure. So
mhm.
you certainly hit on a question that we get a lot, is why aren't these trials open to children? And I think, as you can imagine, a lot of this research, especially the safety component, happens in adults first. We would like to see a significant amount of safety data in adults before that research moves into children. And children are not small adults. They have completely different systems, so you can't just take a dosage given to an adult and divide it by 5 for a child. It's a completely different system. So that is a much more difficult path to work from, is starting in small children, but also ethically, that's not a place that we want to start. We recognize that this is a disease that starts in early children, but we want to demonstrate a significant amount of safety data in adults before moving into small children, especially because a lot of these therapies do have the potential to impact other organs and other components of the body, and a child is still developing. So in an adult, a drug like ATG, which is what you're pointing to, so anti-thymocyte globulin, you would like to make sure that any other organ or body process that is being affected by that is safe and is not being significantly impacted. And checking that in adults means that we're not impacting the development of a small child. Now, those ATG studies, that SAB Bio study that you're referring to, anti-thymocyte globulin, has actually been studied in many, many clinical trials to date, both in newly diagnosed, in pre-diabetes, so those people who have been identified as autoantibody positive, and TrialNet Pathway to Prevention has run some of those studies, including in Canada. So the data there has not been overwhelmingly positive that they've moved on progressively. SabBio is coming at it from a slightly different perspective, but a lot of that research has happened internationally, including in Canada. So I know that it can be frustrating when the eligibility criteria is very small. That's actually done very strategically for the purpose of protections. So it's looking at the cost benefit ratio, and the cost benefit ratio for an adult who is able to understand their body has fully developed, and they can pinpoint any symptoms. So an adult, who's been pretty stable in their health and can say, oh, wait a second, all of a sudden my vision is going a tiny bit. We want to be able to get those adverse events really quickly. It's so much harder in a child. A 3-year-old is not going to tell you that all of a sudden there's a bit of a blur in their eye, right? So that's why that safety data needs to happen in adults first. So yeah, it is definitely frustrating though, as a parent of a child, certainly. And we do see research starting to move. So I'll use Tzield as an example. Tzield, or teplizumab, is that very first ever disease modifying therapy that's looking at the autoimmune attack before type 1 diabetes is diagnosed. It was approved by the FDA in 2022. It is under Health Canada review now. And the approval is for age 8 and older. And a lot of people say, oh my gosh, why not children? So many young children are diagnosed. Well, there's a very strategic reason for that. We know that a significant amount of development has happened by age 8. And so that is the age of youth and adults where there was comfortable applying that drug to. Now that there has been multiple years of safety data shown, a trial is being done in children 0 to age 8, because now we're confident that there is enough safety data to demonstrate. And I think that Allison put her hand up to chime in maybe on something that I was mentioning there. So I'll turn the floor over to Allison for a moment.
Yeah, just in regards to children, I'm just wondering, like, the only maybe setback that I experienced with TrialNet is they didn't really tell us how to prepare our child for these appointments. And my partner and I really struggled with trying to conserve and protect her childhood. But then as her parents, we are transparent with her and we're honest, and she's actually a very inquisitive little girl. And I think that's what we were missing from the trial was, in all the documentation that we received, there was nothing about how to prepare yourself, how to prepare your child. Of course, as soon as we got to the hospital, we did ask, but it's one of those things that once you tell them, you can't take it back. And they're gonna have so many of the same questions that we have, but won't be able to understand the answers. We can't tell you when you're gonna get it, and we can't tell you it's. So I think that part of the mental health aspect, we need to, I don't know. I just think there needs to be more work and efforts done, not just for the parents, but also for the little kids.
Absolutely, Allison. I actually love that you sort of made a plug for our new screening research consortium. And this is also something that Niharika, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, commented on, is that general population screening could be so critical. So if we were screening children, we would have caught those cases. And so we are looking at general population screening, but one of the biggest factors is including people with lived experience in every single component of that, including patient decision aids. Should I get my child screened or not? How does that align with my values? If I choose to, what should I be telling my child? how does that depend on their age? You know what, the messaging, well, there might not be messaging for a 2-year-old, but there would be for a 5-year-old, and that's very different than an 8-year-old. And Lynn, I feel like you can probably speak to this. That's where patient partners come in. And I will say that TrialNet is a study that's been running for 23 years now. They started before patient partners were a thing. And I think you're seeing the evidence of where patient partner involvement is missing.
Yeah,
So Lynn,
I was going to say that because we did, when we participated, it was over 20 years ago. My twins just turned 24 this week. So that was a long time ago. But yeah, it's a great question, Allison, and a great comment. And it's interesting because when I went through one of our studies with the twins, and I was just starting to be involved as a patient. Like after that study, probably about 2 years later is when I started getting involved. And one of the questions that I had was, okay, I'm putting my twins into this study, and one might get the placebo and one might actually get the drug that helps protect his kidneys. How do I make that choice? That's a really tough decision. And luckily I was able to have those conversations with the endocrinologist, who was Dr. Mahmood at the time, to help me go through that. But it would have been great to have, a piece of paper that kind of helped you kind of navigate some of those discussions, and the same thing on how to help set it up for your kids so that they know what's coming. Because like you said, when you're having a conversation with a 5-year-old, it's very different than having a conversation with a 15-year-old, and they're in very different frames of mind. And so you need to make sure that you tailor the communications accordingly. And, that's, like I said, that's part of what I was able to contribute. And both of my boys actually contributed as well. So during when they were doing the attempt study and there was particular recruiting information or information going back to the patients or potential patients, my boys looked at that information to say, okay, from my perspective as a 16-year-old, because they were a bit older at that time, how would I have reacted to this when I was 12, when I was reading it? So they were able to give that feedback as well. So it's been a full family lean in.
Laura, just before I get Niharika, we will get to your next question, but we just have some in the chat. So just
Sure.
wanted, Lynn, was there any result from those trigger trials? I've been researching it, but I can't tell if what I'm finding is the right answer.
Oh, I
So
can
don't want to
I can
put it in.
comment on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
the trigger study. So a lot of these are acronyms. It's not actually the full word trigger. But that was the cow's milk versus breastfeeding study. And it was looking at family members who were at very high risk of type 1 diabetes, whether or not they had any introduction of cow's milk before a certain age versus only breastfeeding. They did find a very small protective effect of breastfeeding, but nothing overwhelmingly definitive. There has been a ton of research, and we hear a lot. What about vitamin D? What about this exposure to this or that? Basically, all of the research in that area has said, yes, there might be these small protective effects of all these things. It's not definitive. No one thing has been demonstrated that it's going to cause or prevent type 1 diabetes. And one of the biggest triggers to the autoimmune attack happening is probably enterovirus, which is hundreds of different viruses, your common cold, your tummy bug, all of those. And so, I mean, that would be the equivalent of a bubble child to prevent having all of those enteroviruses. And even then, that's purely the trigger that starts the autoimmune condition. So to some extent, it is luck of the draw. That if it is in the background and you are, you have those autoantibodies, you're primed for it, there might be a trigger event of an illness. We often hear, my child had an ear infection and 3 months later they were diagnosed. But at the same time, you might not even know it, and it might have been something 2 years ago. So yeah, long story short, there's no single preventative measure. It's been 50 years of research trying to look at that. Yeah, thank you.
I was going to read them. Did someone unmute themselves as well? Sorry, just Sean was asking about Tzield with islet cell transplants.
Okay, Tzield is not, yeah. So Tzield is looking at one component of the autoimmune attack. But in terms of islet cell transplants and the immunotherapy that's happening there, that is not just about the autoimmune attack, but it's about the innate immune attack. So unfortunately, those two don't go together. But there is research going on into very different types of immunosuppressants that are much more targeted rather than whole body immunosuppression. And over the past 30 years, consistently, immunosuppressive regimens have been getting better and more tolerable. But yeah, long story short, Tzield and islet cell is not the same type of immunosuppressant that would work together.
And then this question's for Lynn super quickly, and then we will get to you, Eureka. But Jonathan was asking, how did you get involved as a patient, parent, partner, and how may he be able to do the same?
It's a great question. Because we actively involved ourselves in any of the studies that we could, we became a known family at the endocrinology clinic, and then through conversations with first Dr. Daneman, who was running I believe he was running the trigger study. He was also our endocrinologist, and through conversations with Dr. Mahmood, who was running at it, and they'd recruited Aidan and Ferguson to that. Then he said, "Hey, Lynn, what about this?" And so we got involved organically, just through our participation in the trials. And like I said, and they also involve the boys in providing their feedback as well. So it was very much driven by Dr. Mahmood and Dr. Daneman. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you if there's particular places that you can sign up. I would say next time you go into clinic, have a conversation and find out what's going on. And you can, as Lara showed, you've got all the different trials that are there, and I'm sure you can look that up. Some of them are in progress, some of them are in their gestational stage. And if any is interested, I'm sure the team at Breakthrough Diabetes can put you in touch with the right people to participate. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you ever wanted to participate in research through that kind of like as a patient partner, if you wanted to reach out to us, Ruth can put our generic research at Breakthrough T1D email in the chat, and we can look for opportunities. The Better Registry, and I think I saw Darren post that, the Better Registry is actively always looking for patient partners. They do like to also kind of cycle through their patient partners, right? Get a lot of different diversity of perspectives, because the reality of type 1 for one person can look completely different for somebody else. And then we also do some matching. So for example, our Screening Research Consortium was recently looking for community members, parents of small children, or people living with type 1 themselves to get involved to help inform some of that research. So absolutely feel free to email us, or I can actually look for the link for the Better Patient Partner. So why don't we pass it back over to Niharika, if that's okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I am cognizant of time. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm just thinking about it. So while you say that, for the children, there are many safety concerns, but thinking it from an immune perspective, my son was first diagnosed with hyperthyroid Graves, right? So that was autoimmune. So that kind of, that was pretty obvious that he has an autoimmune condition. Why there aren't any clinical trials, or pardon my ignorance if there is, to treat that autoimmune condition. While I understand that curing type 1 diabetes is like, you're not taking proper steps, you're just jumping steps. Are there any clinical trials available for children of that age where we are first trying to modulate their immune and ensuring that the T cells are behaving properly, and that, for example, in his case, we would know that if his hyperthyroid is being treated. That being said, if his what was told to me was that, hey, cancer has a cure because it is something, happening to your cells. But type 1 diabetes does not have a cure because your body does not have beta cells left. So, basing on that same analogy, I am saying that can there be a clinical trial for immune modulation where we are
Oh,
seeing that some of those other autoimmune diseases like celiac, hyperthyroid, hypothyroid are being treated, which will be very less risk factor for children or even of that age. And once that is achieved, we can go on to look at something more extensive like, type 1 diabetes. Because I don't want my child to be 70 years old and be part of a Facebook page and say, you know what, 70 years ago, my mother said that there'll be a cure. And here I am 70 years old. There's still no cure for type 1 diabetes.
sorry, if you're, yeah, so for prevent, like you're talking about preventative or attack or looking at that autoimmune attack. Yes, there's a
Right.
lot of research. It's like there's a ton going on. Those are disease modifying therapies. There's quite a few happening. Some of them are actually repurposing drugs that work for other autoimmune conditions. But autoimmune conditions are incredibly complex. And that's why it's not as simple as just saying if you treat one autoimmune condition, it will treat another one. TrialNet is based on the pathway to prevention. So when you enroll in TrialNet, you then have the opportunity to participate in all of these preventative studies. And that research has been happening for 25 years. And it was the TrialNet study that got Tzield, the preventative therapy, into approval stage. Yeah, so that research is actively happening, but it's a very complex problem. Yeah, and
So
Lynn,
it is
you wanted to...
TrialNet. It is TrialNet that we have to register.
It's not only TrialNet. TrialNet is specifically looking for people right before diagnosis. So if your son is already diagnosed, the autoimmune system has now done a lot of the damage. So oftentimes it's pre-diagnosis or within those first 100 days or 6 months or so. But again, that research it's only been for about the past 10 to 15 years that we've even understood that early stage. So the research is happening quite quickly and it's quite a robust field, but the science, like we needed the science to understand what was happening with the autoimmune attack in order to start doing those clinical trials. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight for sure, but that research is surely a robust area. Yeah. Lynn, did you want to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to add, as you had mentioned earlier, one of the areas that patient partners help is setting the priorities. And so it sounds like what you're asking for is how do I have a voice in setting priorities on what research is being done where? And so that's a way to participate in doing that.
Yeah, true. And I appreciate you taking, you saying that. Because it feels like, we've been sitting here and while there should have been a cure, there isn't any. So parents are desperate. I'm part of many Facebook pages and I read the stories and you're one of them. I'm one of them, right? I think it's about time that we find a cure, right? Regardless of my analogies may sound stupid, but if you could eradicate polio from the world, if you could have a COVID-19 vaccination, I'm sorry if I sound stupid, but I think
no, it's not. It's not at all. It's not at all stupid. It's the difference between a virus, one single virus, and being able to look at that virus between a very complex autoimmune attack. So you can't eradicate part of the autoimmune system the same way that you could target a single external virus.
Lara, my apologies to sort of intercept here, but I think a lot of it is due to management. People tell me that thank yourself, that management of diabetes has become so easy. From glass syringes to CGMs and to, tubeless pods. But if I were to thank myself, we still had those dial phones. I would not be, why would I need a cell phone, right? Why would I need a Zoom platform? So it's the evolution of mankind. And I just feel that as much desperate or, nonsensical I might sound, but I'm here to voice for all parents, not just me, right? For children. And I don't want him to be an adult 25 years old before a treatment is found, because a lot of the time, quality time is already being wasted.
We
I was going to
completely
respond, but
understand.
Allison has asked in the chat.
Yeah,
That is
and then I
a
think
cure is our
after
focus.
that, yeah, we should try to wrap it up because it's late. But please go ahead, Allison.
I'll make this very, very fast. I think research is being done. Again, I was 12. I'm 42. I had a glucometer that I had to wait 30 seconds to get a result from. And now I have a Dexcom and I have an insulin pump that has literally changed my life. And that is 30 years. I have friends that had to pee on a stick and or wipe their blood off. And they had it when they were 2. So I truly believe that we are going to find a cure or something as good as a cure in the next 30 years. And the best gift that my mom ever gave me was she never made me feel sick and she never made me feel scared. She said, this is not a disease, it is a condition. And as long as you are on top of it and you are managing it, I look at my health through a very different lens than someone that does not have diabetes. And I think that's very fortunate. And it can be a very scary thing, but it's super manageable. And I know that I will be okay. And I know that my daughter will be okay. And if we want the research to be done, we have to be the voice, we have to volunteer, and we have to give back. Because if we're going to have these huge voices about it, we need to advocate even more.
Well said.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and feel free to come to all of our fundraising events, Allison, and say that again. But
I would be happy to. I would be
I
happy to.
understand the frustration, and please be assured that so much is being done to try to find cures. And I know probably every single person on this call who was diagnosed was told the cure was coming within 5 years. And it's frustrating when that has not happened as well. But it really is the most promising time in type 1 diabetes research right now. And I do believe we're closer than ever. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it. I hope that provides you with some comfort. But I mean, you've got our contact information and you have access to us. So feel free to message anytime. And if there's any questions you have, we'll do our best to answer them for you. I'm cognizant that we've run long and Lynn probably wants to go to bed and Laura's kids probably want to go to bed. So I think if that's everything, we'll wrap it up. This recording will be sent to everybody tomorrow as well, along with all those links that I have put in the chat, so you don't have to take anything down. And I hope you'll join us next month when we talk about mental health and type 1 diabetes. And I want to just thank everybody again for joining us tonight, and especially if you're a hockey fan, for being with us and not the playoffs. And hopefully we'll see you next month. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.